Hello and welcome to Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. My name is Larry Rhodes.
And I'm Joe Barnhart, and want you to know if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. As a matter of fact, if you do believe in God, you shouldn't be alone either. Mm-hmm. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find a Freethought Forum, an atheist and Freethought of East Tennessee, and we can have this online, but let's go ahead and...
But this is a show for them and other people curious about living a life free of supernatural beliefs. This is a call-in show. However, we only have one phone line, so if you'd like to tweet your questions in, you can tweet them to @FFTVKnox.
And the Rationalists of East Tennessee, we have monthly activities. First and third Sunday mornings are usually lectures with lively roundtable discussions, and then the second Sunday is a book club. Fourth is reflection gatherings, which is a potluck afternoon at some member's home.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun meetup, often at a bar or a restaurant. Tonight's meetup will be at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria in the Old City. It'll be right after the show for food, fun, drink, and conversation. And Friday, we usually meet for happy hour at the Bearden Beer Market. That's out on Kingston Pike, just west of Knoxville, just west of the Concord Strip, whatever it is.
And
okay. To find us at either one of these places, you need to look for this copy, the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion, standing upright on the table.
Okay, if you don't like beer, you can do like me, have Pepsi Cola or lemonade.
Have a Pepsi and a burger.
Okay, but let's see, we're going to talk today is the problem, where did religion come from? What's its origin? And specifically, the question of sacrifices, blood sacrifices in particular, the other kinds, but where does this come from? We want to try to analyze this and see if we can make sense of it.
Right. But first, we're going to be talking about what was in the news over the past week. First of all, today is the anniversary of 9/11. We must not only remember that awful day and the lives that it ended, but for the lives that it changed, which is pretty much all of us. We must never forget that it was the work of religious faith that made it happen. Not only does it say in the Quran that believers should convert or kill infidels, not only does it say that, but I forget it didn't end well. These Muslims thought that their actions would hasten and ensure their entry into eternal bliss. But even Christians would agree that what they actually did was throw away the only life they had in a violent act of faith. Going on to the next slide, this past week in the Democratic National Convention, it was held in Charlotte, North Carolina, where a certain particular incident took place. After heavy criticism from the religious right for initially omitting them, the Democrats moved to restore to the platform a reference to God and recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The Democrats, though, were hardly in agreement over the reversal. A large group of delegates shouted no, as convention chairman Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villagrosa called for the vote late Wednesday afternoon. Villagrosa initially took the vote for granted. Then, when he realized that there was a large vocal opposition to it, had to call for the vote again. And then, not quite understanding what was going on, again. 3 times he took the vote, and each time the noes pretty much balanced the yeas. He ignored them and ruled that the ayes had it. Many of the crowd booed after that point. Now, here are the important notes. Conservative news outlets and the Christian rights promptly pounced on this incident to claim that the Democrats were booing God. And that obviously showed that the Democrats were evil people. I mean, to boo God, imagine. However, that really wasn't the case. The conservative news outlets and the Christian rights were deliberately misunderstanding and misrepresenting the situation. The boos were because the leader and chairman of the Democratic National Convention, the very symbol of the party itself, refused to hear and act on the will of the delegates, and did so in favor of a specific religion. The rules under which the vote was taken specified that it had to have at least 2/3 majority. He took the roll 3 times, and each time it was obvious that the opposition to the amendment was at least equal to those favoring it. It was a blatant favoring of religion over the rule of democracy that generated the boos. Those Democrats who were for separation of church and state were justifiably angered by this obvious pandering to religion at a cost of the democratic method and indeed to democracy itself. So they weren't booing God.
The reason I was laughing, just imagine there were God. He would say, okay, that's your opinion.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the whole notion of booing God is.
Yeah. But to get together actually to celebrate democracy and then ignore it, which is.
Yeah, that was interesting. By the way, it may be that in the Koran, it may be, depends on how you interpret the Koran, and I want to emphasize interpreting, as to whether or not it advocates killing infidels. There are different Muslims.
Well, I've read specific passages that said that it does.
Part of it is it's in a language that's translated, and Muslims don't like the translation always. Jihad may be translated struggle, and part of that is to struggle with your own desires, and we're going to talk about sacrifice today, and sacrificing some of your own impulses. Right. Is part of what's in the Koran.
That also gets back to the point that why would an omniscient and all-powerful God write a book that could be interpreted 3 or 4 different ways? He could have made it very clear what he wanted.
Well, you could argue, and if I were a Muslim, I'd argue this. Once you create human beings, once you create them, then they're not automaton.
Yeah.
You see, so that and part of being human is to interpret material. But are we ready to move into our theme?
We're ready to go.
Okay, now, where does the notion of religion come from? It's a big concept. We want to try to narrow it down. It's still pretty broad.
Religious sacrifice or religion?
Where does sacrifice come from? And let me give we all believe in sacrifice in some respect. I sacrifice a lot, and you do too out there. In order to gain certain other things. That's part of being human. We have certain impulses. Say we get angry. We sacrifice that because we know that it would be wrong to carry it out. And so for the sake of our morality and even more for the sake of the other person, we sacrifice that anger and put it to sleep if we're lucky. And so and there are many things, and I would like to even sacrifice more pains and also more pounds.
Right.
and if I had my way at the house, I wouldn't even buy ice cream because once it's in the house, I won't eat it.
Right.
So sacrifice is human. The question is, how did this get to be sacrificing animals and early in the human history, children and other people to a God? Where'd this come from? I think it comes partly from this anthropomorphic view of the universe. Did you think of the God wanting some blood, like your enemy wanted blood in a war, and so you give him?
Yeah. Well, the only thing that you can empathize with is human emotion and feelings and wants and needs. So if something is happening to you, a lot of times it's another human doing it to you. But if it's nature or something that's impersonal, you would tend to, like you say, anthropomorphize it and give it a human nature, which is pretty much what they did to nature itself.
Yeah. In fact, we still use the word, the sea is raging. And there's an account, I've forgotten where it is, of
Mother Nature.
Of a man who threw over a lot of money in a storm, and apparently
making a personal sacrifice to appease the weather.
And we have in the story of Jonah in the Bible, in which there's a big storm, and the people on ship are afraid that it's going to sink. And so they cast lots and decide that Jonah is the one that apparently the God is angry with. So they throw him overboard. It's a great story. And the Hebrew writer had a great imagination. So he had not the pagan sea god to swallow him, but just a
great fish.
And then he burped him up and sent him.
Which wasn't really a sacrifice, except it left the ship a man short. But the sea never really actually claimed him. He was given back.
That's what that story, I think, is about. In some ways, that story is a spoof of this notion of sacrifice.
You don't think of the Bible as containing too many spoofs, but I guess.
Oh, the Bible is a great literature if you read it.
But in a lot of spoofs, I don't think of it that way.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
There's a story of a king of Moab. In fact, it's in the 2nd Kings, who sacrificed his first son. And this was the son who was supposed to be the next king. That's in a battle. He sacrifices it, and the Israelites then depart. Now, the Hebrew Bible says they were just shocked, apparently. But it is very likely, if that's a real historical event, that was simply saying, let's trade off. I'll give you the next king to make peace. And that often happens in tribal warfare.
When you think about it, the exchange of sacrifice is basically commerce.
Exactly,
when you sacrifice something that you want to get something that you feel that you need or could do better with. But what we're really getting to is what's the origins of that? Where did this type of exchange come from in the early history of man?
Well, you put your finger right on it already. Commerce. The deity had something. He can give you a lot of blessings, or she can, depends if you're a Greek or not, or Hebrew. Or the gods can give you a lot of trouble.
But they have to have something in return.
They got to have something. And Plato, who is there in Athens, contends this is nothing but bribery. All these sacrifices, he says, or it's like lottery, or even worse, the lottery in Washington, in the sense of you have people trying to bargain in government, and here you're trying to bargain God to get what you want. And Plato ridicules it and says that, in effect, God doesn't need this. Now, what's interesting is that in the book of Acts, you have the story of Paul going to Athens, Plato's homeland there, years after Plato, and he sees all these sacrifices and all these different gods, and he says, God needs nothing, has no...
If he's a perfect being, he shouldn't.
He needs nothing. Now, it isn't surprising then that this same Paul had the notion that all the sacrifices of animals was unnecessary, just unnecessary. And that was, when you think about it, that's a major revolution.
Same. But you have the very real, intangible sacrifice that people do without any supernatural thing like this. This rock climber who got caught in a crevice with his arm caught behind or beneath a boulder, and literally cut his own arm off to get out. Now, he knew that was a sacrifice he had to make, but there was no other third party involved. There was no supernatural being, no religion at all. But he knew that it was a sacrifice he would have to make if he was going to continue to live, and that was a trade he was willing to make.
Yeah, we've all read stories of animals who get trapped, and they'll chew off
a leg. It's even a pre-human trait. It didn't even begin with humanity or human beings.
Yeah, you could say religion has biological roots and animal roots. I'll give you an example. I saw a tape of a troop of baboons being attacked by a leopard. Now, no one baboon, no matter how much noise they make, cannot handle a leopard. But this troop had a way to deal with it, and this just was amazing to me. Is the leopard was about to attack one of them for a meal, apparently.
Yeah.
So another baboon attacked the leopard
from behind
at right angles to get his attention, and this leopard then attacked this one. Then another baboon came at right angles, distracted, and then another. And when you watch this, you realize that this troop was not prepared to sacrifice anyone.
Right, they weren't going to have the sacrifice.
Yeah, but they were all willing to risk, but they were not willing to sacrifice. And it was a beautiful picture to watch the leopard just kind of finally wear out.
Sneak off. Yeah, sneak away. Well, these baboons exhibited a high order of intelligence to do something like that.
And morality, that's the origin of morality.
But when you get into lower mental facilities of a life form, like a herd of zebras or antelopes, and you've got lions chasing them, as a herd, they will, unknowing to them, will sacrifice the slowest or the hurt one or the
Weakest,
sick one, the weakest one, for the good of the herd. That's not something that they decide on, but it's something that happens.
Just happens,
And the herd itself is better off for it. So that is a type of sacrifice. It's a natural sacrifice.
I have a short story I read of Russia, and I couldn't find it. I'm 80, so I can't remember everything I read. Of a Russian family in the snow being chased by a pack of wolves, and they were in the sled. And the question was, would you sacrifice one of your children to the wolves in order to save the rest of them?
Or the old guy, the grandfather, or maybe the father because he's no longer able to produce children, whatever.
In other words, you'd save the one who could drive the sled, but if you have someone too old, that would be, in other words, the sacrifice there.
You would think that they would carry an extra leg of lamb or something along with it. Like a spare tire.
In Russia, they don't have many sheep around in that cold weather. But
just to remind the viewers, this is a call-in show. We do invite your questions or comments. We're talking about the origins of religious sacrifice, and if you'd like to call in and comment on us, you can call at the number at the bottom of the screen, or you can tweet us questions and comments at FFTV Knox. And if you're want to watch this, if you're watching this on TV and want to watch it streaming later, sometime you can catch it at fftvknox.org. So, getting back to the topic at hand.
Okay. I was saying that they moved from child sacrifice and human sacrifice, and then, the rabbis reconstructing this, and even before the rabbis. Then you got animal sacrifice. Then you have a lot of vegetable sacrifice. In other words, what this is, I think you're quite right. This is bargaining and it's commerce. See what the God will take. Finger sacrifice was a major sacrifice in many parts of the world.
What was?
Finger sacrifice. And you can see how it developed. If you think that God wants human blood, rather than give your life, give a portion.
There's a Latin term for that, isn't there?
Yeah, there is, and I've forgotten what it is. 2 words. Part for whole.
Toe or something like
part
that.
For whole.
We have a slide on that, I think, don't we? Pars pro toto.
Pars pro toto.
Yeah.
Part for the whole.
There you go.
Yeah.
When you sacrifice a part to save the whole, like the slow antelope or even a pinky or something like that. You brought up vegetable sacrifice. That brings up one of the major sacrifices of the Bible was Cain and Abel's sacrifice. One was giving up burned offerings of animals, and the other one was vegetable, and that didn't work out too well for the human race.
Yeah, that story was written, it seemed to me, from the viewpoint of the ranchers rather than the farmers, because God wanted to have animals.
He liked the smell of burning flesh.
And that's more of not the farm community.
Okay, we have a phone call coming in. Welcome to Freethought Forum. May we have a name and nickname, please?
You can call me Caller.
Caller.
Okay.
Caller. Do you have a comment or question?
Yes, I was saw something on the pagans a while back and got me kind of interested in their society. And I was kind of curious, you were mentioning Plato's sacrifice, and I think he was in the pagan era at that time.
Sure.
In Greece. And I was, one thing I've never heard of is human sacrifice among the pagans. Now, I know prisoners being executed. I was wondering if you could help me out there and enlighten me on what I mean, I know they did animal sacrifices, but I was wondering if it went any further than that with them.
In other words, whether or not they would actually offer a human
Right.
On an altar. I don't know of any cases. They were quite willing to offer their enemies in war, and but that's a different matter.
They did the gladiator thing too, and that was sacrificing them. But then again, most of those guys were either prisoners taken from war, or they were criminals for the most part. So it was like killing two birds with one stone type of thing.
Yeah, you raise a good point. The Greeks in that sense had, I think, learned bargaining much better. And that, of course, what we're reading about the Greeks there, we don't have as much literature as we would like, but they were, in effect, they're living in the Mediterranean, right there in the ocean, and were learning to bargain, and they were negotiating with the gods, and you don't give away your best.
Right. The ancient Aztecs, I believe, were really good about taking conquistador prisoners and then sacrificing them as well.
Well, I think the Aztecs also sacrificed their own people, but I have not heard of that in the pagans that lived in the Europe, Mediterranean, and Greece, Italy.
That would fit. Your view would fit more with the Greek notion of pride, and you wouldn't sacrifice your own.
And the
I was just curious about that. There was one sacrifice in the Bible, and it has to do with Gideon. Gideon tore down an altar and built an altar to God, and then he sacrificed a bull. And as I read that story, I got the impression at first that Gideon's father was a Christian and said, "No, please don't kill my son over this." But then I realized that Gideon was apparently a pagan worshiping Baal, and he was actually saying that Baal will punish you if you kill this guy.
Well, Gideon, in the Hebrew Bible, he's already in the Hebrew tradition. But Baal, B-A-A-L,
yes,
is already part of the Canaanite religion. And in fact, you got El, Baal. El is already a name of God. You got Samuel, Ruel, and all of this. And they borrowed each other's gods in some of their practices. And there are two cases, clear cases, of human sacrifice being dealt with in the Hebrew Bible. And one is which a man says he's going out and fight, and if he gets victory, he's going to offer a sacrifice to God when he gets home.
Jephthah's daughter, he said he was going to sacrifice whatever came out of his home first to greet him when he came back from the Bible. Mm-hmm. This is in Judges 11:31 through 40. And after he did the battle, he came back, and his daughter came dancing out to greet him in timbrels and I can't remember the other word. But
simple,
after a little bit of a story where she went into the mountains and bewailed her virginity with her friends, it says that Jephthah kept his promise to the Lord. Mm-hmm. In other words, he sacrificed his daughter. So this was not only a sacrifice that was made to God.
I know that story. It's a pretty stark story. But what I was getting at when I had the question about Baal, is that considered a pagan god, this Canaanite god?
Well, the notion of pagan simply means, and from the Hebrew tradition, the others, the other peoples. In other words, the tribal view and the God view were all bound together. So these were other gods. In that sense, it'd be pagan, heathen. You see, it means other in that respect. And the other gods had, in fact, you have really a crossover here, and then rewriting the stories. I mean, you have in Genesis, God apparently slaughtering the firstborn of the Egyptians. I mean, that seemed to me to be child sacrifice. Not all those firstborn were grown, but it's still human sacrifice.
Well, actually, he also killed the firstborn of the animals, too, so it was really kind of overkill.
Well, there's a statement in the Bible that the firstborn of everything belongs to the Lord. Mm-hmm. The first thing. Now, that's pretty ancient. That goes way back at least to the Stone Age.
Yeah.
Oh, one more thing I was wanting to mention before I get off here and let someone else call in. You mentioned El as being a suffix of God. Is that correct, Samuel? You mentioned.
Yeah, Elohim. Elohim is plural.
If I could point out another similarity is in Superman comics.
Kal-El.
Kal-El, called
Jor-El,
and I believe it was taken from like angels' names like Gabriel, Michael.
Yeah.
And I believe that he was putting that in there. The right word knew through history and all that. Anyway, thanks for taking my call. Thanks for answering that question. I'll let somebody else call in.
Thank you, caller.
Bye.
Bye. And the lines are open again, 215-2288.
We could mention the story of Abraham thinking God wants him to offer his son, and then later Abraham discovering he misunderstood, and later it's called a test. But I think this is a story countering it.
Why wouldn't an omniscient God know whether he believes or not? Or
well, some say it's a test.
Yeah, we have to wait for the call screener to do this.
Some say it was a test of Abraham.
Okay. We have another caller coming in. Welcome to Freethought Forum. May we have a name or a nickname?
This is JB.
JB.
Fellas, how you doing today?
Doing fine. How are you? Do you have a comment or question?
Let's have a question, if you would. You're talking about sacrifice today. I've often wondered, I've watched your show many times, and sometimes I agree and sometimes I haven't.
Sure.
What you say. You seem pretty satisfied with yourself and self-satisfied, so I guess you must feel like you're teaching truth.
No, we're no more self-satisfied than any preacher on any corner.
Go
or
ahead.
Any church.
You were making a good point. Go ahead.
Do you think that? Do you agree with Dawkins that the deed or this recessive trait is a moral mental defect, and that laws of eugenics should be laid against it?
Okay, let me deal with Dawkins. I don't like a lot of what Dawkins does. I'd rather deal with the issues, and not with the people.
Okay, but Dawkins and Harris and Daniel Dennett and the departed Chris Hitchens and I guess Paul Davis and these others, they seem to think that this problem with belief, and you seem obsessed with it almost. An agnostic would say that you're overly obsessed with something that has no meaning.
I'm an agnostic.
Every time your program is the same attacks, yet Bob Ingersoll or the mistakes of Moses, these things. I'd like to see a metaphysical naturalistic philosophy as an alternative.
Well, I could go.
Atheism is not a philosophy.
Well, no,
it's just
wait.
a question. It's an answer to one question.
Wait a minute. This man's got a really good point.
Okay.
What you're saying, and don't let me put words in your mouth now, okay?
Oh, trust me, I won't.
Okay.
There won't be a sacrifice.
I like that. What you're saying, if I'm understanding you, is you would like to see in great detail outlined what is meant by a naturalistic frame of reference or a philosophical outlook.
The problem they used is that he simply said these things couldn't exist because they couldn't exist. There was never been a truly humanist manifesto.
Oh, wait a minute. I was asking a question. Is that what you were asking for?
For metaphysical naturalism as opposed to this obsession with this old-fashioned Bronze Age faith, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not talking about an obsession. Let me ask you this. If you have a physician who specializes in curing cancer, do you call that an obsession?
So you call yourself, you're a healer of the illness of faith then?
Put it this way. I'm trying to get a point by an analogy. See if you can follow it with me now.
I can follow it. I'm just saying, are you considered yourself a healer of the genetic disease of faith?
No. What I'm doing is this. Is just as you're trying to give me a different point of view to get me to see a different way, that's what I'm doing. And that's what human beings do with each other.
Do you disagree with the agnostic position that obsession with faith is kind of sometimes meaningless?
I don't like your word obsession because that's a put down word, and you know that is, don't you?
That's why he's using it.
I simply ask you, do you agree with this agnostic position?
You've been.
Well, I answered you. I'm saying I don't buy your presupposition that to deal with this is an obsession any more than a doctor who is trying to deal with a particular disease, if I can use that analogy.
Or a philosopher dealing with any particular topic.
You said
Yeah.
disease, yeah. But you are obsessed by dealing with disease. Is that correct?
Yeah, for example, let's say you're trying to correct my thinking on something, okay? That's an intelligent a way of people talking. I wouldn't therefore say that you are obsessed, you're just trying to present a point of view. You see what I'm getting at?
Making a comment that what you say, if you compare yourself to a healer whose life is dedicated to correcting the evils of a disease, a eugenics plan to correct that, is that part of that?
Well, let me ask you a question. This TV station that we're on right now
Go ahead.
has an awful lot of religious programming. Would you consider that every one of those people that are on here talking about their faith is obsessed?
Maybe they're just healers like you.
Okay.
Well, I'm asking you a question. You asked us several questions. I'm asking you a yes/no question.
Teach whatever they want. Simply ask.
You called in and you started off insulting us. And then you expect us to give you a regular dialogue, but then you just start throwing these accusations around. Are we going to have a conversation, or are we not?
Let me ask you one.
A lot of religious broadcasting on here. Some I think is ridiculous, and some I think is interesting. But I'm simply asking you, on your religious broadcast or your broadcast here, do you believe that faith? Do you believe that faith or belief in a deity or creator God or something is a form of mental or genetic?
No.
Okay.
I thought I answered that in the first place. This is not something. Let me answer. Since you asked a question, I'll try to give my answer, and then if you want to give yours, that'd be fair enough.
Great.
My answer is, I don't regard. Let's suppose you and I differ on something. It'd be ridiculous of me to think you are mentally ill just because you disagree with me. And the same if you disagree. For example, some of my best friends.
Some of your best friends, ouch.
No, pay attention. If it's not too difficult, pay attention, okay?
I can pay attention quite well.
Okay, try this.
Friends, that was great. That was a great line.
Okay, yeah, it was great. Kind of old, but great. Now, let me say some of my best teachers, so that won't offend you too much. Okay? Never mind. Just forget it. Okay, what's the next point?
Okay, well,
Can't defend your position, but thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We'll
Okay.
go to mid-program break. We're a little bit past it right now
Yeah,
anyway.
okay.
Just in case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions. Shows are live most every Tuesday from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern Daylight or Standard Time. You can also see it streaming online outside the Knoxville area by going to ctvknox.org. This is a call-in show, as you're well aware now. Live today, September 11th, 2012. And callers can call in now, and the number is on the screen, or they can tweet us at FFTVKnox. The Atheist Society of Knoxville meets twice a week. We have a meetup right after the show down at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for fun, food, drink, and conversation. ASK's purpose is to supply a venue for community, camaraderie, and outreach to atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, and other like-minded people in East Tennessee. The Rationalists of East Tennessee has Sunday activities involving lively presentations and discussions of subjects topical and timeless. Once a month, they get together for a book club, and you do not have to have read the book to attend. It helps, of course, but sometimes it's in lieu of reading the book that I go. Both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee help provide a social outlet where that if you find that you don't believe in God, you're not alone.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a caller coming in.
Okay, let's
take
get
it.
Yeah. Okay, caller, let's hear what we have. Go ahead.
For Freethought Forum.
Hi,
Go ahead.
What was your name? I'm sorry.
Dietrich.
Dietrich, welcome. Do you have a comment or question?
You're talking about basically kind of sacrifice in religion, and to me, that always seems like basically.
Go ahead.
and it seemed a way for people kind of to express their own commitment. And you talk about relationships and kind of, you're giving kind of a political, economic type comparison, and that's not totally off. A lot of animistic religions, like Shinto especially. Shinto, you have the kami of each different object. Like, if you want a good harvest, you'll pray to the kami of that land. You'll build shrines and everything like that. And from what I've learned about it, it's basically that system, basically that you have a god that's not acting as love, with kind of terrible to you.
You're breaking up. Can you say that again?
Yeah, I think I see. He's talking about animism. And I think what we call anthropomorphism did.
Yeah, a little bit.
It has a lot of similarities with animism. That is, treating nature like rocks as spirits, as
Like
if they're animals.
Native Americans.
Yeah. In other words, the human history has been pretty long in doing this sort of thing, and there's some good reason for it. And so you lived in the woods.
You have to live in cooperation with nature.
Yeah, and also, it's a lot easier. It's more sensible to mistake a large stone
As a predator?
for as a predator rather than to mistake a predator for a stone. So, and that basically, you could say this is what science is taking original conjectures and revising them. This is how science gets started. It's how common sense. Common sense means you've got many senses, touch, taste, sound, and so forth, and you put them all together in common testing them. And so, if you think it's an eagle, and it turns out to be just a bunch of leaves.
So they call that class 1 error or something?
Yeah, and we do it all the time.
Was that the point you were trying to make, Dietrich?
Oh, sorry, I don't know when I got cut off. Just the comparison between kind of maintaining of a relationship, if it's like political or economic, I mean, that's pretty dead on. And so I mean, it's a very realistic comparison, and I think that when you look at religions that basically you are kind of subservient to something instead of having a kind of relationship to it. That probably just comes from just the norms of the region, if you have a ruling board and stuff like that. I was wondering if you know, basically when blood sacrifice, that type of stuff, kind of moved away. Like I went yesterday, it looked like Karen Armstrong called Great Transformation, which is about 2,000 years ago, when lots of areas in the Middle East and Asia, it looks like there was kind of a move towards more of a kind of a diligence type sacrifice rather than physical flesh and blood sacrifice.
Well, the blood sacrifices are still going on. It wasn't a month ago or 2 months ago that we heard about some mechanics that sacrificed a goat to bless the repairs that they just put on a plane, a commercial airliner. Yes, this happened like, I guess it was in the spring. But this type of thing's still going on, and especially in poorer, smaller countries, like Haiti, Cuba, things that you have voodoo. They do animal sacrifices all the time. There's even in Judaism. There's you cut the throat of a chicken and spin it around your head several times to cast particular spell.
Yeah, I want that.
So it's still going on. Human sacrifice, thank goodness, is outlawed all over the world at this point.
What's a real practical question in this, too, is you can see, unless you're accountable, human sacrifice doesn't have the nutritional value. See, my question is, and it comes up a little bit in the Hebrew Bible, but not too much. When these animal sacrifices are made, and the meat is cooked, who eats it? Now, there's one passage that says the male priest shall, which suggests there might be female priests. If they're pregnant, they would need food for
Well,
two.
not only that, but I mean, even the earliest ones, like sacrifice of goats and cows and pigs and even vegetables were taken to the temple and left there. Now, who do you think that would take it?
Well,
now, what kills me is the firstborn of all tribes belongs to the Lord. What happens to those firstborn?
Well, that's
Were
why
taken to the temple.
I think that's why what you have in the story of Samuel is religions constantly revise themselves. Here you have Samuel taken to the temple, to the priest, but he's not sacrificed as a blood sacrifice. He's given to the priest to be, in effect, his protege.
Yeah.
And he later becomes a...
Yeah. I remember reading in National Geographic several years ago where up in the Chilean mountains, they found a small girl that was all dressed up in sacrificial dress. And the story was that the priest would then take the human sacrifice, the girl, and lead her way up to the top of a mountain and leave her. Now, I mean, he doesn't have to kill her; he just leave her up there, and that was sacrificed to God. But,
well, one of our callers, wanted to cure us of talking about religion. I think if we could see it in broader context, we're actually talking about our human history. And if you don't understand human religions in the past, you're not going to understand us today.
Is that anthropology? Study of
that's anthropology. As a matter of fact, two books here I have are The Creation of the Sacred and Faces in the Clouds, are both by anthropologists. So in other words, the study of religion, like the study of economics, is a study of how human beings have behaved and what they are trying to accomplish, and it helps us to understand their worldview.
why?
And if we understand them, we can better understand ourselves. And to respond to our earlier caller, and I want to be cured of that. I want to continue that sort of thing. It's interesting to me that in the Hebrew Bible, it's interesting to watch. It's just fascinating to watch. Some of the prophets in the Old Testament are really denouncing child sacrifice as evil. And then one of the prophets is even denouncing some of the sacrifices because he is taking the position that what this deity really wants is good behavior. And that's a major, see what I'm suggesting, these are major shifts. Then you get to the New Testament, and you've moved away from all blood sacrifice.
Except for one.
And what's interesting to me is you got three interpretations of that among Christians at least.
Dietrich, did we cover what you wanted us to cover?
It was basically what you were just talking about. Just understanding human nature. I wanted to bring it up just because I don't think the previous caller kind of realized that what we discussed things it's more observation and trying to figure out rather than supposedly very eugenic or kind of ridiculous stuff to say.
Sure. Did you have anything else for us then?
No, not really. I kind of was wondering, do you think that maybe, if you look at, sacrifices to religion, like a lot of times priests will get, the food offering that's left over. Maybe, there's a movement where they realize, we can't really do much with dead bodies, but we can do a lot with money and food. Maybe we should start taking that instead. So maybe it's just kind of a logical jump what would be most kind of efficient for the church itself.
Right. You could do something with dead bodies if you were the priest and had a lot of enemies. you could eliminate a lot of enemies that way. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your call.
Go ahead. Thank you for taking me.
Okay. Just a reminder, we are going to have a meetup we always have a meetup after the show down at Bull Feathers in the old city. Not Bull Feathers, Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria. in the Old
Barley's,
City. One thing I'd like to bring up going along this is what we currently sacrifice. Like it says on the screen, what do you sacrifice for your religion? What are the sacrifices that people would normally make today for their religion? I'd like to start off the list with just a few. Money, of course. In a lot of churches, it's very expensive to be a member of their religion. Time. A lot of times they will have you meet 2-3 times a week. Meet them hours at a time. You will sacrifice your intellect or your reason, because you can't use your intellect or reason if you try to question some of the things that the preacher is telling you. You will be ostracized or shouted down or just silenced.
Yeah,
So you
I've
cannot
heard
practice your intellect or your reason.
Yeah, I've heard preachers, and not all preachers are alike, but I've heard some preachers classify doubting as a sin, which
Right,
is to
it
say,
is.
if you think it's a sin.
If you think it's a sin.
Have we got another caller coming
Yes, and I just had two more things.
Go.
You can pretty much sacrifice your scientific evidence that people are bringing to you every day, which you just say poo-poo, it doesn't work, it's not right. Modern science, and you can actually sacrifice your health or your body, as the suicide bombers do a lot of times. Those are some of the things I thought of. Can you think of any more?
Well, to support what you're saying is I know of a person who believes that he talks to people who have been dead thousands of years.
Right.
And this person is very much opposed to science. Because that challenges. And I would say if a person wants to do that, don't oppose science. Just see if science does really. And
if you can,
just test it. Yeah.
Okay, welcome to Freethought Forum. You're on the air. May we have a name or a nickname?
Hello, this is Faithless Forrest. I've been watching part of the show here. And,
Forrest.
I guess the question that today's show poses is one that I think has a couple of. One of them is a little bit more accusatory than the other, and the other more communal. Let's talk about the communal one. I think that the origin of things like animal sacrifice is simply building a tradition for community meals, where in the days before refrigeration, but you're not going to eat it yourself. You're going to share it with your neighbor.
There is an anthropologist named Durkheim. In fact, my wife wrote a dissertation on Durkheim. I would agree with you that this sacrifice is not to the gods so much as with the gods, and it's.
You read the Iliad when they do sacrifice to their god. They'll throw a little bit of the fatty part on the fire first, and a little smoke up to Jupiter, and they'll throw signs on the ground. And they're sharing the meal with the deity.
What's funny is
good point.
If my ex-wife makes wine, and if the part that evaporates from the wine is called the angel's kiss, you know that?
No,
that's kind of a sacrifice, but that's the way they termed it anyway.
Well, then the other interpretation, one, and I'm going to paraphrase Saul, and that is that there will always be requests for religious sacrifices, so long as there are priests and ministers and imams who prefer to live off the word above.
Okay, now let's be fair to them. In terms of money is not asking for blood. Now, sometimes there is a difference. All of us sacrifice money to something we believe in. In other words, I give to this group and this group and that group. And
nowadays, Joe, money is convertible easily into beef or chicken or your favorite flesh.
It's just another form of sacrifice. It's just a more convenient form that it will take.
It has.
Go ahead.
Well, hey, I lost my opinion, but let me clear the line so that you can maybe get a few more calls.
Okay, well, thanks for calling. Thank you. Do you think that we could turn to the final sacrifice according to the Christian religion and talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, I think this is part of the development. I think the reason I'm interested in this is I'd like to see how human beings solve their problems. That's why I like anthropologists. I don't say, well, these were ancient, stupid people. That's wrong.
No.
These are people who inherit a viewpoint, and they're trying to solve their problems
With the best information they have
that
at the
they
time.
have. And if we see that that's the way they are, that's the way we are. And we make the same kinds of mistakes. And it is an amazing progress to move from child sacrifice and sacrificing your enemy to sacrificing an animal. And to take Lee's view and turn that into a ceremony of the community and sharing the meat, and that is an enormous piece of progress. And then I would even say the finger sacrifice is a big sacrifice compared to some of the others. And then even circumcision, having been circumcised, of course I wasn't aware of it, but that's no big deal from my point of view. Now, from my personal point of view. So what I'm saying is there's a history of human beings modifying themselves morally, and their gods also being modified. So the study of the gods, to respond to one of our previous callers, to study the history of religion and the gods is really to study ourselves, because our gods are like
it's a projection of
ourselves. Yeah. Now in Romans 12:1, to get to your question, which I think is crucial, what about the sacrifice of Jesus? Paul says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Now you have three views among early Christians. One is that the sacrifice of Jesus was really a sacrifice to the devil. Now that's early. That's very primitive.
I haven't heard that one.
And then you had Anselm coming along. He was an archbishop, saying, no, it was a sacrifice to God, a blood sacrifice to God. Then you had a contemporary priest named Abelard at that same time said, no, what it is Jesus was in heaven. Now this is a major shift. Jesus was in heaven. He came to earth to teach human beings how to love and to forgive and get along with each other, and he was killed.
For that.
For that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that God sent him to be killed so that God's honor could be sacrificed. Yeah. That was old Anselm.
Many people do think of it as a sacrifice.
They do, yeah.
But when you do a sacrifice, you want to gain something in return. Your safety, your welfare of the group. What was Jesus' sacrifice for?
Well, what Anselm was saying is that God is really angry at human beings. Because we've offended his honor. Now that was Anselm.
Which has a word?
Well,
I'm trying to get you to say the word sin.
Well, sin is, that's what offends God so much.
Sin, in my view, and in view of most free thinkers, atheists, is a construct of the church. It is something that they tell you that is wrong with humans because of their stories that has to be paid for by human sacrifice. And they name Jesus as the person who has paid that sacrifice. But there has never been any kind of evidence to support the fact that a sin exists at all.
Okay, let me get behind sin before that. Borrowing from what Lee said on this is a community thing, I think that has a lot of insight. Religion has to do with community. A community has certain needs and goals, and if you violate them, then you have to have...
Well, they obviously had a communal understanding of the fact that sin exists and was real and had to be paid for.
Okay, now...
But how true is that?
Okay. Well, that's it. Suppose that somebody steals your television, let's say. So simple a thing as that.
Yeah, but that's really a trespass against another person. A sin is a trespass against an invisible, non-existent being.
What I'm trying to say is get behind that.
Well, I understand it. I'm just trying to bring out the problems with it. I understand that Christians and the religious are trying to explain why it was necessary for Jesus to die to pay for the sins, because we all have sins and it's necessary that we, I mean, it was a communal thing where they understood it, they believed in it wholeheartedly. Every person that lived in their society wholeheartedly stood behind it. But what I'm saying is, haven't we moved past that point, since now that we have ways of testing like prayer, the efficacy of prayer,
yeah, we've beyond that. Let me ask you that. I mean, we're in agreement on this.
Okay.
My question is, let's suppose you have a brother. Suppose I kill your brother. Okay. Now, how am I going to pay for that?
Right.
Tell me.
Well, there's only one way that I can think of, is you have to come to me for my forgiveness, and even that won't pay for a lost life.
No,
you can't.
No.
But the problem I see with structured religion, or religion per se, is that they feel, the adherents to the religion feel that they can turn to their invisible existent or non-existent deity and get forgiveness from them, and it's pretty much over. It's
okay, now let's suppose you and I know that's not going to happen.
Right.
Now, see, I'm getting back to Lee's question, and even our first caller had an interesting point. I don't want to put words in his mouth now.
Right.
But if you do or I do something to the community, let's say, not to a God, but the community, then you have to wrestle with the question, how does my horrible deed get paid for? Now, if I'm understanding you, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, is you're saying if I kill your brother, I'm going to jail.
In our society today, yes.
But you're saying to me, and I'm thinking I'm agreeing with you, that still's not paying for that.
No.
There is no payment.
Right.
So what I'm suggesting is this. See what you think. That the Apostle Paul was wrestling with this very question. It made no sense. I don't think he knew of a historical Jesus. I think he thought somebody died, and he came up with the notion that can be just the final blood sacrifice. And now he's the one who said, this is the same Paul, let your bodies be a living sacrifice.
I think that's a pretty good idea. I mean, to put an end to human sacrifice itself is obviously a good thing. And for him to have come up with it at that particular time in history, I can't find any fault with that. It's all the other things that are supernatural at the time that I have a problem with, that we really can't live with anymore. In the words of Christopher Hitchens, religion served us fine at one point in our human history.
Would you agree with this?
But now,
go ahead.
It's not. We have like 40 minutes, 40 seconds left.
What I'm trying to say is, if you watch how they solve their problems with their anthropomorphism, and then we're trying to do the same thing, even though we don't buy the anthropomorphism, we can learn something from them, even though we don't buy the whole hog.
Oh, sure. And we can also understand how they felt and commiserate with their society, and give us a lot of insight into our own society. So, no, I think it's great.
Well, thanks to our audience. It was very helpful.
Yeah. We have about a minute and 15 seconds left. Was there any last point that you wanted to talk before we went into the closing?
No, I ran out of steam.
Okay. Well, we could have 10 seconds of silence for 9/11, I reckon.
Oh, yes. Speaking of sacrifice.
Yes, it was. And we're still sacrificing for it. It's time to start wrapping things up. Get out your pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Please send us feedback. We have a voicemail account at 865-272-9060. You can email us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com, or you can see the show on Tuesdays from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on this Knoxville station, or at ctvknox.org. I'd like to send our thanks out to Sam, Jonas, and Forrest for the technical support, and to the staff of CTV Knox and all of our callers. Remember, Examine your beliefs. What is real has nothing to fear from examination. See you next